Bionicle's story started simple. 6 heroes, 1 destiny. These 4 words were everywhere in Bionicle's early marketing, and for a reason, as they perfectly capture this essence. The first 3 years were centered on the Toamada's quest to awaken the great spirit Metru Nui from the clutches of the evil Makuta. The appeal wasn't so much in the intricacies of the narrative than those found in its unique world and atmosphere. It was simple and concise. Until it wasn't. If your familiarity with Bionicle begins and ends with those popular LEGO robots from the 2000s, what I just described matches any mental image you might have of the franchise. Anyone with a deeper familiarity, however, knows that this is only part of the story. Bionicle's most recognizable iconography only lasted 3 years of its 10-year-long run. The series spent less of its lifetime gradually moving into a drastically different direction, pushing the boundaries of its identity with each passing year. And it all started in the City of Legends. The Metru Nui arc is when the franchise first pivoted from its established norm. The tropical island setting and reverent mysticism of the early years were replaced by industrial cityscapes and surprisingly grounded tone. It was a new era that ushered a new direction expressed across different mediums, one of which happens to be the movie. In a way, the movie marks an evolution for the franchise moving forward, and that's what I'm here to discuss. I'm here to analyze the movie, explore its themes, and see how it chooses to break from its predecessor both for better and worse. I am the Arcanist, and without any further ado, join me, my gathered friends, as I dissect the evolution of Legends of Metru Nui. Legends of Metru Nui's development began shortly after Mask of Light. In fact, a second movie was already greenlit while the previous one was still in production. Given the franchise's popularity, a successor was a natural conclusion for LEGO, and so they started on the second movie's pre-production. As for the topic of the successor, it was a no-brainer for the head of the story team, Bob Thompson. He wanted to continue exploring the world of Bionicle further. In his head, the story was vast, spawning millennia upon millennia of stories, conflicts, and characters, to the point he divided his mental image of the story into multiple arcs infamously known as the 7 Books of Bionicle. So rather than continuing the story of Takua, Toamada, and the others, Thompson instead wanted to explore the world's past. He wanted to explore the origin of the Matoran and the Toa, which he teased in the making-of documentary of Mask of Light.
We're going to discover a new world, we're going to discover the origins of the Matoran, where the Toa originally came from, and a whole heap of other things.
Bob Thompson wasn't interested in exploring the origin of the Toa we know and love though. Instead, he wanted to expand the universe by revealing there being more Toa than just the 6 we are familiar with. In fact, Thompson wanted to reveal the Matoran, Toa, and Turaga being states of the same species' life cycle, rather than different species symbiotically living with one another like the audience previously assumed. It is not known if this was something Thompson always planned for the story, or if it was a retcon. Regardless, the idea of Matoran and Toa being the same species was possibly something not everyone in the story team knew at the time. In 2002, Greg Varsity, the writer of the comic books and later lore guardian of the franchise, answered a question regarding the relationship between Matoran and Toa in a way that indicates a possible ignorance of this fact. What is a Matoran? In other words, is Matoran just a new name for the villagers, or does that consist of everyone? Hafu, Huviki, Oneva, and Pohatuel are Pokorans. Does this mean that these 4 are now Matorans, or only Hafu and Huki?
Matoran is only used to refer to villagers, although technically a Turaga is a Matoran who has ascended to a leadership role, but when we use it, we mean villagers.
This is interesting when considering that the story team plans 2 years in advance. Even when 2004's story was already being brainstormed by the story team at the time, not everyone knew the final details. It should be pointed out that at this point, Greg Varsity was far less involved with the story than later years, as he mainly wrote the comics based on the outline the story team gave to him than actually contributing to said outline. Then again, it's possible Greg knew at this point and he was just being purposefully vague to not spoil anything. Regardless, the movie was once again produced by Creative Capers, with Terry Shakespeare and David Molina at the helm. It is worth noting that the actual animation was also to a Taiwanese company called CCGC. There being two directors allowed the creative capers stay in touch with TCCGC. One of the two would go to check out how the animation team in Taiwan was faring, while the other would stay in States within the main studio. What creative capers themselves was the environment for the movie. They designed the city of Metru Nui in its vast glory.
We wanted to give this audience a bigger view of the Bionicle world, more environments, larger vistas. The island of Bionicle 2 is something like Manhattan, with lots of commerce and large buildings. The first film was very intimate, very organic. Metru Nui is more mechanical, so it has a different feel.
From there, everything went pretty smoothly. Pretty much everyone involved with the last movie who didn't leave midway through the development, Greg Weisman, came back for a second go-around. In addition to the previously mentioned Shakespeare and Molina, once again, Shu Shakespeare served as a producer, Henry Gilroy wrote the script, and Nathan First composed the music. There aren't really that many funny stories or anecdotes this time around. No voice actors switched roles during auditions, and no one was hired through their dentist. That said, before moving on to the movie itself, there is something I need to talk about. You see, some believe that Legends of Metru Nui wasn't supposed to be the start of the new chapter for the franchise, but rather its last page. Whispers claim that Legends of Metru Nui was planned to be a theatrical finale for the franchise. Mask of Light and Legends of Metru Nui were meant to serve as a two-part finale, with Legends of Metru Nui concluding in Metru Nui's awakening. As crazy as this may sound, there is actual evidence supporting this. One thing I didn't bring up in my previous video was the weirdness in Mask of Light. I did bring up the weird inconsistency in Makuda's characterization, but that isn't the only instance of such oddity. In particular, something I glossed over is this weird sense of finality found all over the movie. The characters speak as if they are going to awaken Metru Nui here and now, when we know now that this isn't the case. Takanua's confrontation with Makuda is treated as this final fight against evil, and Makuda would come back later on being the undead mastermind he is. In general, Mask of Light feels like a grand finale, which is jarring in hindsight. But perhaps the most notable evidence to this claim is a mysterious promotional poster made by Christian Faber. Originally, the prequel was supposed to be a theatrical movie known as The Mask Maker. For whatever reasons though, these plans were cut short, and at some point in the development the movie changed to a direct-to-video movie. This poster also feels far more sinister and climactic, truly fueling the idea of the movie being a grand finale. There is just one teeny tiny problem though. There isn't much concrete evidence supporting this idea. Most of the evidence is purely circumstantial. Yes, Mask of Light was most likely meant to lead to something drastically different than what we got. But that doesn't mean that it was necessarily leading up to the franchise's grand finale. Even if the characters bring up Metru Nui's awakening, it's very possible the story was meant to continue from there. Time and time again, story members such as Thompson, Forsty, or even series creator Christian Faber reinforced the idea of Bionicle being a long-form story meant to last for years, if not decades. And given how Bionicle was practically keeping LEGO afloat at this point in time, it makes no sense for LEGO to cancel the series either. What is far more damning is that there aren't any concrete claims backing these rumors. Apparently both Greg Forsty and another notable story team member, Alistair Swinnerton, have made some comments supporting this, but these comments have been lost to status of time, if they were even true to begin with. The theatrical rumor at least has some evidence, as a magazine in 2003 announced Mask of Maker being a theatrical production. But the finale claim? Not so much. If anything, there is far more evidence to the contrary. At the time of Legends of Metru Nui's development in 2003, pre-production on its sequel had already started, which wouldn't be the case if it was truly meant to be the finale. In addition, both Molina and Shakespeare stated that there would be more coming after Legends of Metru Nui. They also denied the claims of a theatrical sequel, though they have at least made one comment claiming Legends of Metru Nui's follow-up would be one. So, if the claims of a finale were true at some point, it was only for a brief moment in time. The idea of Legends of Metru Nui being a finale is deeply appealing, as the movie's early development is far more shrouded in mystery than Mask of Light. Ultimately though, it's just a theory. Wait, am I allowed to make that joke? Mathpatch retired a few months ago. Would using him in a joke be outdated? Should I have instead used the new film theory host Lee? After all, we're all talking about a movie, so it makes sense to use the new face of the channel rather than clinging to the past. It doesn't matter. We should wrap this up and just talk about the movie. 1,000 years before Mask of Light, the Matoran lived in the city of Metru Nui, an advanced metropolis divided into 6 different districts. However, the city's peaceful front is slowly cracking, as Matoran have been disappearing and more corruption is on rise each day. The city's sole protector, the valiant Toali Khan, is investigating the corruption, as he is pursued by 2 mercenaries known as the Dark Hunters. Desperate, the Khan gives 6 mysterious stones to 6 Matoran, 1 from each district. As he delivers the stone to the last Matoran, a meek mask maker named Wakama, the Khan is captured by the Dark Hunters. The devastated Wakama is summoned to a mysterious temple alongside 5 other Matoran, where their stones transform them into Toa. Now, the newly formed Toa Metru have to learn to control their powers in order to find the Khan and save Metru Nui from ever-looming darkness. Legends of Metru Nui is quite a departure from its predecessor. Instead of being a traditional fantasy adventure involving quests, artifacts, and prophecies, it's about a group of misfits thrust into a situation they are unprepared to handle. While the quest to find the Khan serves a similar purpose to Takua and Jeller's search for the seventh Toa, there isn't a simple roadmap or heroes follow to accomplish their goals. There isn't a grand prophecy to find Toa Khan serving as the safeguard guiding the Toa Metru. Rather, it comes from the own character's volition and desire to do so. Sure, there are Wakama's visions and the notion of the Heart of Metru Nui that's vaguely alluded throughout the movie, but those are really secondary motivations. The other Toa Metru berate Wakama for his visions, and even believe he's just making them up. And for the Heart of Metru Nui, most of the movie's runtime the characters don't know its meaning. The only real guidance our heroes have is the situation at hand. They are doing these actions because they are the things to do, because they are being pursued. In many ways, they are passive. They are whims that are not to some grand destiny, but rather the situation at hand. This ties into another of the movie's main differences to its predecessor, its tone. Mask of Light was a relatively light-hearted movie. There were emotional moments, distraction situations, and stakes, but most of the movie was light-hearted. By contrast, Legends of Metru Nui is far more tonally dour. The characters are far more mean-spirited and the situation is more dense. The stakes rise higher than ever. Sure, Mask of Light had stakes thanks to the Rakshi, but not as dire as in Metru Nui. Here, all the Matoran and the city is at stake. A sense of omen smells everywhere in the story. It never leaves the characters and thus the audience. Wakama's visions show that Metru Nui is in danger. The haunting image of Wakama seeing a Matoran's fears one after the another has truly engraved itself into the minds of many. Another reason for the tone is the lack of levity. Mask of Light had plenty of room for jokes and moments of respite for the cast and the audience. Legend of Metru Nui, not so much. There are comic reliefs, perhaps most notably Matau, but the movie uses them in far more sparingly. The color palette also plays a factor. Mask of Light's colors were warm, vibrant, and welcoming. By contrast, Legends of Metru Nui is far colder and darker. Another of the more overt ways Legend of Metru Nui differentiates from its predecessor is with its setting. The industrial Metru Nui is a stark contrast from the vibrant island of Metru Nui. It's far more rigid and serious. It also has far more identity. Each of the 6 districts bear a striking identity with their own culture and tradition. It is a shame then that Metru Nui is criminally underutilized within the movie. To be fair, I get it. This is a kids movie, not a soap opera. We don't have the time to explore the intricacies of, say, the ins and outs of the Lee Metru's truth system. Movies in general tend to lack the room to explore their settings to the same degree as books or TV shows do, due to their shorter runtime. It is far more ergonomic to spend safe runtime on plotting characters rather than exploring the world. As such, it's understandable. Regardless, it still stings. Metru Nui feels more window dressing than a real lived-in city that meaningfully affects the narrative. It could be changed into any fantastical city, and not much would change from the story itself. This ties to the biggest issue with the movie. Legends of Metru Nui suffers from having too many ideas stuffed into its short runtime. which leads to it not having enough time to spend on its numerous plot points. This leads to unknowable structural and pacing issues. At times, the movie massively jumps from one point to the next. Perhaps the most urgent point this happens is early on the movie. After the Toa Metru receive their powers, the movie briefly shows their exploits in a montage before moving on with the narrative. This isn't much addressed or plays a role, it simply shows that it happened. It could be simply cut and not much would change. To be fair, we know why. This was around the time Bionicle started to play more with its multimedia format. These stories were explored in other materials, most notably the books written by Greg Forstey. As such, they don't really matter the story because they are parts of a different story. But still, this could have easily been cut and the movie wouldn't suffer. If anything, it would benefit from it, as it would tell essentially one continuous story. In general, this is where the franchise's multimedia aspect makes it suffer a bit. It tries a lot of stuff to do, but it makes the story branch out in a way that affects the movie itself. It doesn't feel cohesive anymore, but rather as a part of a larger whole that shows itself peaking at the seams. It's ultimately a minor nitpick, but still affects the mental memories. Legend of Metru Nui has still a lot going for it. It tells an interesting story that's far more grounded and darker than we before had, and does a lot of interesting ideas to move the story and themes of the franchise moving forward. But in order to talk about that, we need to talk more about the characters themselves. As previously described, Legends of Metru Nui follows the Toa Metru. Unlike Mask of Lights, Legends of Metru Nui is a Toa-centric movie. The Toa Metru are the main characters and heroes. They are the ones who happens the story. The ones who the story happens to and who grow. Well, more specifically, Wakama. Wakama is clearly the protagonist, the one who the story revolves around and who has the arc. The other Toa Metru matter less as individuals and more as a collective. The collective arc the Toa Metru face is growing from their challenges. The Toa Metru face many different struggles. They get outlawed by their own superiors. They get outlawed by their own Turaga, the seemingly benevolent Turagaduma, and have to fight the corruption and find Toa Khan while being outlaws. This helps them gain more confidence and become better. Out of the 6 Toa, Wakama is the one with a clear arc. The other Toa matter less individually and more as a collective. Out of the other Toa, Nakama and Matao get the most screen time because they are with Wakama. The other 3 are done a bit dirty due to the father. Wakama's arc is somewhat similar to Takua's, but it also has a few differences. The most notable difference between the two is that Takua is overly optimistic and positive. He is simply just doubting himself at that moment. Wakama, meanwhile, is heavily characterized by his doubts. His most notable character trait is his fears and insecurities, to the point they swallow him. So throughout the movie, Wakama fights with his insecurities. He fights with his issues. The visions are literally manifestations of Wakama's own fears and insecurities, crystallized into a pure unadulterated form. Eventually, Wakama manages to overcome his fears. He manages to become the Toa he was supposed to be, the Toa he felt he wasn't meant to be. We'll touch more on how later, as it involves another character. But by the end of the movie, Wakama is far more confident in himself, and far more believes that he is not just a capable leader, but also a capable Toa. The other characters, as said, don't have much to talk about. Nakama's main role is being the supporter, Matao is the main comic relief, and the other 3 don't really do that much. But again, that isn't the point. They are more so the collective and helping Vakama's arc than anything else, which isn't a bad thing. But now that we have touched on our heroes, let's go to talk about our villains, and oh boy, there's a lot to talk about. One of the ways in the Legends of Metru Nui sets itself apart from its predecessor is that it has multiple main villains. Mask of Light had one primary antagonist in the form of Makuta. The Rakshi were a major threat for sure, but as I stated in my video, they were less their own entities as much as extension of Makuta. By contrast, the Legends of Metru Nui has two primary antagonistic forces in the form of the Dark Hunter Tugo and Chiragaduma. They are connected for sure with Duma hiring the two Dark Hunters in the first place, but they still act as their own separate entities. Before we talk about either of our main antagonists though, there is still something that needs to be addressed. We need to talk about Dewaki. During the first couple years, Bionicle used something the fans call army builder villains. Rather than having the annual villains as pre-proper characters, they instead represented 6 different kinds of the same enemy type. Whether it be drones like the Borok or monsters like the Viserak, they served as mindless foot soldiers to go focused against throughout most of that year's story. Actual villain characters like Makuta were reserved for the big special Titan sets. The Valky were 2004's army builder villains. In the story, they served as Turagaduma's robotic enforcers who patrolled Metru Nui, ensuring order would be kept by any means necessary. Essentially, robot cops. The Valky are considered to be the worst army builder villains by a long margin. Partially this is due to the quality of the competition. The Borok and especially the Rakshi are held in high regard due to their killer designs and menacing presence. And the following years, Viserak have their dedicated fans. By contrast, the Valky are seen as dull, not the least helped by Greg Farstey's admitted distaste for them. While there are many factors for the Valky's lukewarm reception, I can't help but wonder if their portrayal in the movie is partially to blame. Because let me tell you, the Valky are done horribly dirty in the Legends of Metru Nui. The biggest problem is that the Valky serve no purpose in the movie's narrative. Unlike elsewhere, they serve as Turagaduma's means of ruling Metru Nui with an iron fist. This is mainly nominal, however, as the Valky mainly stand around Duma. Occasionally they do something minorly important like leading Matoran to their Duma or pursuing the Tula, but even this is done with little fanfare. A big factor in this nominality is how plainly the Valky are portrayed. Compare this to how the Rakshi are portrayed. Throughout the Mask of Light, the Rakshi are presented as its ultimate threat. Their presence is when the movie is at its most tense. Every time they are on the screen, things get serious. Fighting them is futile and results in failure. The Rakshi bring genuine tension to an otherwise lighthearted adventure and give weight to the movie. The Valky lack this fear factor. For villains whose entire tagline is surrender or run, the Valky never evoke terror like the Rakshi did. The Valky never create this sense of, oh shit, this Valky. Instead, the Valky are treated with this sense of apathy. For all of its words, the Valky are glorified props. I wonder if this is like the movie's focus. The movie never has the two Metros sneak around the city to avoid the Valky's gates. Instead, the two Metro are on the run as exiled pariahs trying to find a way to return to their city. As such, the Valky don't get to be on their home turf, instead parrying the Toa across the many nooks and valleys surrounding Metru Nui. This isn't to say the Valky can't be done well. They can. The Valky animations by Temple Studios is perhaps the best usage of them, as they treat Valky as the soulless enforcers they are supposed to be. Thing is though, the Valky need to be intimidating in order to work, which isn't something Legends of Metru Nui does. Oh well, it is what it is. While the Valky may be Turagaduma's main line of defense, they are his only means to enforce order in Metru Nui. After declaring the Toa Metru as a threat, he hires the two Dark Hunters to capture the Toa. The Dark Hunters consist of Nidiki, a cunning insectoid, and Kreka, a office brute. The Dark Hunters serve as the main provocative antagonist throughout most of the movie. As such, their purpose aligns far closer with the Rakshi compared to the Valky. Granted, there are some obvious differences in how they are used, but generally speaking, they share the same narrative role. The first major difference is in their characterization. Unlike the Rakshi, the two Dark Hunters are proper characters with clearly defined characterization and dynamic with each other. In fact, they were the first villains in the series to be proper characters rather than mooks. Makuta notwithstanding, of course. This is highlighted not just by the writing, but also their designs and voice performances.
They went this way?
Their designs and mannerisms alone tell a lot about their personalities without a single word, which is an indication of good character designs. The same applies to their voice acting. The brothers Bob and Michael Dobson's performances as Nidiki and Krekka respectively bring life to the characters. Going into specifics, we'll start with Nidiki. Nidiki is cunning and calculative, being the sharp tactician of the duo. He is the one calling the shots and doing the planning of the scene. He is also heavily defined by his stubbornness and impulsivity. He is fully determined to capture the Toa and gets irritated when things don't go according to the plan. Usually because of Krekka or some outsider factor, but mostly Krekka. Side note, Nidiki is my favorite Bionicle character due to how delightfully Betty he is. Nothing analytical, I just wanted to point out how much I love Nidiki. Interestingly, the movie implies Nidiki having a complex backstory that isn't really dwelled on. His confrontation with Lacan not only revealed the two sharing a past with one another, but also being former allies. Nidiki mockingly calling Lacan a brother, and Lacan refusing it, all but stated if not at Toa, Nidiki at least had a similar relationship with Lacan that the Toa had with each other. Later stories reveal that Nidiki was a disgraced Toa turned monster, but it's not known whether or not this is a retcon. So I won't dwell further beyond noting how it does add some insight into Nidiki's knowledge of Toa and his determination. He knows how Toa behave from experience and is driven by his own twisted sense of duty he admits himself. In hindsight, it is also rather funny how so much of the promotional material emphasizes on how mysterious he is, how no one knows his past or what his deal is. We know what his deal is! He simped for a cat girl and paid the ultimate price. That's literally it! Krekka meanwhile is far simpler compared to his companion. Were to describe Krekka with one word, it'd be dim-witted. His rather simple demeanor often leads him to being tricked by the heroes, much to Nidiki's charging. Don't assume that Krekka is completely useless, however, as his strength more than compensates for his lack of intelligence. Normally I'm not the biggest fan of dumb brute villains, but I do like Krekka. This is largely thanks to his voice. Michael Dobson gives a rather darky performance to the character that makes him endearing, and thus elevates Krekka from what could easily be a generic stock archetype into a simple-minded yet somewhat likable character. You can't help but feel bad for the guy for all the blunders he falls through in the movie, not to mention the amount of berating Nidiki gives to him. Well, at the very least until you remember that he is still a villain at the end of the day and trying to apparent or heroes. And then you get to their dynamic. In spite of being allies, the two can't stand each other. Or more specifically, Nidiki can't stand Krekka. He gets increasingly irritated at his partner's shenanigans and failures, often berating him. This back and forth of goofy dumbassery and irritated nonsense make their dynamic rather enjoyable, and these moments are among some of the most fun character banter in these movies. So, Nidiki and Krekka are solid characters with well-defined personalities whose contrasts create a fun dynamic. How are they as antagonists? Well, this is where things get complicated. The beginning sets up Dark Hunters as genuine threats for our heroes to overcome. The movie opens up with them capturing Lacan in a way that's genuinely upsetting. It starts innocently enough. The two mercenaries are fighting against Lacan, showcasing their competence and, more importantly, persistence. As Lacan delivers the Wakama to Towa, the two ambush him. And this scene is pretty tense thanks to the orange hues and the small room creating a somewhat claustrophobic atmosphere. The two Dark Hunters are surrounding Lacan and Wakama with nowhere to run or hide. It's still pretty fun though. A bit tense maybe, but nothing too distressing. Just a solid way to establish our villains. That is, until this happens.
Oh, help me, please!
Remember what I said about how Max Kaplan uses Lavrakshi? This is the only time Legends of Metru Nui doesn't just attempt capturing that feeling, but manages suppressing it in execution. The way Nidiki threatens to drop a mere civilian to his death is, genuinely speaking, the most sickening thing a villain does in these movies. Sure, the Arch's destruction is presented as a tragedy, but at the end of the day they are still mere servants of Makuta with no free will on their own. Nidiki isn't a mindless agent of chaos. This is an intelligence, sapient being fully aware of his actions and still goes with it with no remorse. Human verse, he is doing it just to manipulate and taunt the one he hates the most of pure, unadulterated spite. Nidiki knows full well he is taking advantage of someone's goodwill. Someone that, need I remind you, is heavily implied to be his former ally. Nidiki knows how Lacan thinks and acts inside out. Of course Lacan will surrender. This is Towa Lacan, the perfect hero, the paragon devoted to protecting the weak.
He would never let a civilian die. Of course he will trade his life for Makamas. That is who the Khan is.
And just like that, the Khan surrenders and is taken by the Dark Hunters as Wakama helplessly watches behind, unable to do anything. In this moment, Hideki is an utter monster. And then the rest of the movie happens. Not only does the movie never attempt anything similar, the two Dark Hunters are used completely different throughout the movie. Rather than being the genuine threat the movie's opening said the must pass, Hideki and Rekka spend the rest of the runtime as being the goofy henchmen. They are the Bebop and Rocksteady, the Jesse and James, the Arcanist and Mumimon. Come to think of it, Hideki and Rekka are surprisingly similar to the Arcanist and Mumimon, even meeting a similar demise at the measure of their masters. The main difference is that Arcanist and Mumimon actually like each other. Hideki and Rekka hate each other's guts. There isn't anything wrong with this. Comedic villains can work. I do enjoy a fun comedic antagonist from time to time. The thing is though, you have to understand when and where to have these villains. And that's where I think Legends of Metru Nui falters a bit. Remember what I said earlier about Legends of Metru Nui having far more serious tone compared to Mask of Light? Well, that was just partial one. Not completely, mind you. The movie does try to be more serious than its predecessor, and for the most part, it does succeed in this. But I left out how the movie treats its antagonist from it. Because Hideki and Rekka are arguably the comedic reliefs of the movie, even more so than Metau. Most of the moments of levity come from the antics of the duo. Rekka's stupid shenanigans, Hideki's reactions, and how the duo Metru outsmart them. And remember, these are the main antagonists. These are the proactive threats who hunt down Tom. They are the Rockshi. And the difference is, the Rockshi are never treated as comic reliefs. And in that way, the movie handling of the villains is completely different. The Rockshi are the serious element in a otherwise lighthearted movie, meanwhile the Dark Hunters are a lighthearted element in a otherwise serious movie. And again, for antagonists who are supposed to track down or heroes in a serious movie, this feels like a bit of a misstep. It feels a missed opportunity that Hideki and Rekka are just treated as jokes, nothing more and nothing less. Again, I'm not saying that this is inherently bad. Rekka works better as a comedic character, but it does do Hideki dirty. He is the far more serious and competitive dude, and as said, does some kinda heinous shit throughout the movie. Rather than taking advantage of it and making him a truly despicable threat, he just becomes Rekka's comedic foil-tone with his shit. Again, there isn't anything wrong with this. I love me my cranky spider boy. But again, I can't help but feel disappointed. Then again, I've been through worse with my villain faves. Hideki is far from the worst. So, the villains are a bit underwhelming, but there is one exception, arguably the most important antagonist in the movie, Dragon Duma himself. Duma is an interesting antagonist, and that's because he is incredibly unique by Bionicle standards. Up until this point, Bionicle's morality was, for lack of a better word, simple. The characters were clearly divided between heroes and villains in a way that's easy to understand for its younger audience. The heroes were vibrant and brave, the villains were sinister and cruel. There weren't really any second guessing for the character's moral alignment. What you see is what you get. Duma throws a wrench in this. He was the first, and in all honesty, one of the few, villains in the series who challenged the notion of the good and evil in this universe. Not that he completely escapes these pre-established shorthands of moral alignment. His colors are the stereotypical villain black and red, and his name is freaking Duma for crying out loud. They aren't being exactly subtle here. In spite of that, there are traits that make Duma stand out from antagonists in the series both before and since. He isn't some dark evil tyrant whose protestation screams capital E evil. Instead, he's presented as a trusted authority figure that the city of Metru Nui relies on, presenting himself in a calm and collected, affable manner. It's ultimately his actions of ruling the city with fear and trying to take down the Toa that make him an antagonist, not his mannerisms or role in the society. Of course, this isn't necessarily anything original in the fiction. Seemingly benevolent authority figures turning out to be secretly evil isn't some revolutionary storytelling technique Bionicle invented. For crying out loud,
I'm a JRPG fan. That genre lives on this trope practically as much as it does on killing gods as the final boss. Nor is it a concept unique to fiction in general, especially in this day. One of the biggest markers of our postmodern present is the increasing disillusionment towards other figures, working less for their people and more for their own self-interest, which has led to more and more stories having a message of not trusting your own authorities. But what makes this stand out in Bionicle is the franchise throws into the series' pre-existing moral framework. Up until this point, Bionicle framed its authority figures as trustworthy leaders with their subjects' best interests at heart. Sure, the two weren't exactly honest, but the shadier actions were excused by it being for the greater good. By contrast, Duma was the first time the series started to doubt the validity of leadership. He was the first authority figure that wasn't portrayed charitably. Sure, Duma's presentation wasn't that dissimilar from the other Turaga, but his kindness was just a facade. Underneath his pleasant mannerisms laid a sinister figure, one who claimed to help for the greater good, but in reality only cared for order, which makes him a really interesting and, in a weird sense, realistic villain. Good and evil aren't always obvious. Sometimes evil hides in plain sight. Sometimes the figures we are meant to trust turn out to be monsters, Pied Pipers luring the innocent citizens to their doom. Sometimes power and trust is misplaced to a bad faith actor, someone who abuses their power for nefarious ends. Which is why all of this is so frustrating. All this is undone with the reveal that Duma was actually Makuta in disguise. Spoilers for the 20-year-old children's movie, by the way. What's next? Makuta actually wasn't Metru Nui's brother, but rather as a... wait a minute, I already did this gag last year. A common criticism given to antagonists these days is something that's called the boil and kittens problem. Essentially, it's when stories present seemingly well-meaning antagonistic characters who fight for a just cause, like protecting the weak. But in order to present them as villains, they end up doing something really nefarious and out of character, for instance, trying to threaten innocent civilians or acting in a way that contradicts their moral code. And let's talk about the just as frustrating issue when trying to tackle master and realistic subject matters is cutting them short by pivoting into a cartoonishly evil bad guy to blame all the problems to. The best example I can think of this is Pokemon Black and White. The game features a sympathetic antagonist who wants to break the story's status quo and has somewhat a point to his actions, but rather than walking the player to the end, the story instead chooses to pivot to Justice, a megalomaniacal lunatic who just wants to take over the world just because. And for me, the reveal of Duma being Makuta kind of falls to this. As said, Duma is an interesting antagonist because as a corporatician, he is far more realistic than what we have had before. So to reveal that he was just the evil Dark Lord the heroes has fought against feels rather underwhelming. It also kinda starts the trend with Bionicle where every story is connected to Makuta in some way, where Makuta is responsible for every bad thing happening in the story even if he wasn't the main bad guy of the arc. And in general, I didn't necessarily hate the reveal, it's just rather underwhelming and it just wastes the potential of what Duma could have been if he had just been his own character. But I digress. For Makuta himself, he's fine. Once he's a real, he kind of becomes the typical bad guy. Unlike with Mask of Light, there isn't really much to talk about, even being basically a final boss fight for Wakama. For what it's worth though, said final fight is actually really cool. I actually kind of prefer it over the final fight in the last movie, largely because of the atmosphere. There is one little thing I want to know though. Remember in my last video where I talked about how the common perception of Makuta in Mask of Light may be a bit skewed? Well, this movie proves it. Because remember, by this point Thompson was still working on the series, and as such, this is what he wanted with the character. And well, listen what Thompson has to say when he describes Makuta in this movie.
Makuta's mission is a very simple one. He believes that if he can get all of the Matoran together, shut them all down, he can then wake them up as their savior, the person that brought them all back to life. And he thinks that if he does that, he can replace the Great Spirit in their mind. Now, Vakama doesn't believe this, but no one's really willing to take that chance. And it's a pretty incredible thought that he could pull such a stunt on people. but he's pretty close to actually achieving it. And I think that's one of the things that gives great drama in the story. It's a very, very ambitious villain.
Yeah, Makuta wasn't just an innocent victim, was he? I actually consider this to be the nexus point of what the character became later on, and it isn't that different from what Greg firstly wrote. There is still one character left to discuss, one who ties the movie's central narrative and themes together, one who is integral in Wakama's character arc and to show us why, in spite of its shortcomings, Legends of Metru Nui still pushes Bionicle forward into a brave new direction. Because isn't it mud I haven't talked much about Toa Likan yet? Likan is introduced to us as the epitome of heroism. He is characterized as valiant and noble, always willing to take action, yet compassionate to others. The ideal Toa. The first 8 minutes are largely from Likan's perspective. We get to see him in all his heroic glory, to see the brave hero, the valiant protector of Matoran. We get to understand him, if not only for a brief moment, which creates a sense of safety in the audience. But just as we are getting comfortable, Likan is taken away from us. The brave, undefeated hero is dragged to who knows where, all for doing his duty. Likan is the hero of Matoran, so of course he chooses to protect one over his own life. And just like that, Likan is gone. Likan is gone and no one could save him. Likan is a character who matters not because of his presence, but rather absence. His role is to be the guiding light of Toa Metru, the one who pushes them, shows them the way to heroism. Throughout most of the movie, he doesn't actually do this directly. Instead, Likan haunts the narrative. He haunts the other characters, especially Wakama. As I said in my segment on the Toa Metru, Wakama is the movie's main character, and the one with a character arc. Likan is the factor that makes Wakama's character arc work. He is the major motivation for Wakama, the push that drives him, and the element he constantly compares himself to. Wakama's insecurities are largely tied to Likan. To Wakama, Likan is what Toa is supposed to be. Because Wakama isn't Likan, he cannot be Toa. He cannot be a hero. Likan is also the factor that separates Wakama's arc from Takua's. Sure, one could argue Likan shows a similar Joel to Jarlar, but not entirely. Jarlar is entirely defined by his presence, whereas Likan is more so by his absence. Eventually, Likan is found, but as a Turaga. He isn't the hero destined to save Metru Nui, no, that's the Toa Metru. Throughout their journey to find Likan, the Toa Metru have grown on their own. They have found their powers and become their own heroes. Well, every Toa Metru except Wakama. If it had been easy to simply just have Likan return as a Toa, the Toa Metru wouldn't have been able to self-actualize themselves. They would just let Likan do everything, which goes against everything the movie tries to do. So Likan is a Turaga, no longer the warrior, but rather the teacher. And eventually, the teacher has to go. At the movie's climax, Likan sacrifices himself. He saves Wakama from Makuta's attack at the cost of his own life.
This is my lifetime's journey. Yours lies beyond.
By sacrificing himself to protect Wakama, Likan paves the way for the new generation of heroes to take charge. It is the passing of the torch from one generation to the next, letting the old die and be replaced with the new. The lessons of those Pioras are remembered and carried to those that follow, all while avoiding their mistakes. Likan taught the Toa Metru everything he could. He has completed his duty, and now it is his time to go. And he does so peacefully. This is when Wakama finally gets his mask power, as it is the moment he realizes he is the hero now. While he can't replace Likan nor move from him, Wakama at last comes to terms with his purpose, that this was his destiny all along. As such, he finally is able to use his mask powers. It serves as the culmination and the proof of his character arc, a reward of sorts for letting go of Likan. Likan elevates the movie. He is the ideal hero, the goal that Toa Metru strive for not just literally, but metaphorically. In this sense, Likan is the glue that holds the movie together. Without him, the movie wouldn't work, and that's because of its themes. Legends of Metru Nui is largely about passing the torch. It is about the previous generation passing their knowledge to the next one, the successors worrying if they can carry their predecessor's legacy, and the students surpassing the teacher. In other words, Legends of Metru Nui is about evolution. Legends of Metru Nui was a stark departure to what came before. It told a darker, more character-driven story about inferiority complex, the fear to surpass those who came before you because you feel you aren't enough. It was willing to push the envelope, to tell a story the series hadn't told before, and that was necessary for the franchise's survival. There's a bit discourse surrounding whether the later arcs are as good as the first three. A small but dedicated minority believes that the series lost its charm after leaving Metru Nui, and that it no longer had the aspects that made it great to begin with. Why did they fix what wasn't broken? Couldn't they just do tropical islands and mystical heroes forever? Why did they need to pivot to child-friendly edgy superhero Warhammer? While I can sympathize with this mindset, I disagree. I doubt Bionicle would be as good, nor anywhere as memorable, had they just stayed in Metru Nui forever. And that's because change is necessary for long-running franchises. Compared to what our current nostalgia-obsessed culture might indicate, franchises survive by innovation rather than repetition. All entertainment shouldn't be best of hits compilations of icons of yesteryear, but instead use familiar building blocks to craft new sculptors. This is why Bionicle was so special. Thompson, Forshty, Faber, and the rest understood this. They understood that in order for Bionicle to have staying power, it needed to evolve. It needed to change and do new things rather than repeat the same old. And that's why Legends of Metru Nui is so important. It was the first step for Bionicle to break its mold, to experiment and push boundaries. It is rather fitting then that the movie tackles these ideas. Vakaum's core journey mirrors the franchise beautifully, and poetically reflects it. This is why I can forgive the movies at times inconsistent structure and tone. Honestly, it would have probably been much better as a miniseries. But what we got is still good. The characters are compelling, the story is interesting, and the movie is engaging. But most importantly, the themes are resonant. No wonder I slightly prefer it over The Mask of Light, even if the latter may be the more cohesive of the two. Once again, thank you for watching. I am the Arcanist, and this is the way of Bionicle.